Hey, hi everybody. Okay, as you see, the topic is, have we had a spiritual awakening towards our compulsive behaviors? If we go to the OA 12 and 12 again, the OA 12 and 12, basically when you go to an Overeaters Anonymous meeting, they talk about compulsive eater. A lot of times they talk about, and it says in the preamble, in the very beginning of the book, our primary purpose is to abstain from compulsive eating and compulsive food behaviors and to carry the message of recovery through the 12 steps of OA to those who still suffer. And then if you go to page 1, which is the introduction to the 12 steps, it says here, we of Overeaters Anonymous have found in this fellowship a way to recover from the disease of compulsive overeating. Again, the word compulsive, constantly talking about this compulsion. We use compulsive eating and compulsive overeating interchangeably. These terms include, but are not limited to, overeating, undereating, food addiction, anorexia, bulimia, binge eating, and overexercising, purging, and other compulsive food behaviors. No matter what form our disease takes, anyone having a problem with food can find help in Overeaters Anonymous. After repeated failures to control our eating, our weight, we now have a solution that works. And it goes a little bit further down. In OA, we have no program of diets and exercise, no scales, no magic pills. What we have to offer is far greater than any of these things. So what do we have to offer? Well, step 12 says, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry the message to others, especially alcoholics, and to practice these principles in all our affairs. So again, we work with all 12-step programs here. But basically, a lot of times we do refer to the Overeaters Anonymous food addiction, and it's the solution, step 12, spiritual awakening, and the spiritual awakening towards our compulsiveness, our compulsions. And again, we can relate it to food, it could be drugs, alcohol, but it could be anything in life. So it talks about a solution here, which isn't a diet or not even really exercise, but a change of thinking. So what I really needed was a spiritual awakening, which is seeing a new pair of glasses, seeing my addiction, seeing everything differently. And the problem was when I was into the really strict diets and whatever I tried to do, because step 1 says we're powerless, the more I got into the addiction. Does that make any sense? The more we try to fight something, the more resistance we get, the more we're in the problem, so to speak. So I wanted to be what's called in the solution. And the solution means I had to have a complete change of thinking. Well, if you just look at, like they talk about here about an anorexic, an overeater, so what is usually the difference? The difference is the way they perceive life and their addictive substance. One person says, well, I wanted this thing to fill me up with all it is to fill that hole I have within me. And the other person says, well, if I restrict it and control it that way, that's the answer. So it's showing, and then, what the interesting thing is, one day a person who's restricting something can then overindulge in it. And the next day they say, well, now I'm overindulging tremendously and I'm not restricting as much. So what was the difference? It's had to do with the thinking. Our program tells us in the big book, we have an allergy to the body and all of this, but it says if our thinking changed, that would become academic, meaning not important. So if our thinking changes, we wouldn't have to begin that indulgence of the substance that's creating the problem. So again, the topic is we've had a spiritual awakening towards our compulsive behaviors, and step 12 says again, having a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. So the solution is the steps. The steps is the solution, and it's interesting. We come here sometimes and be addicted to gambling, alcohol, drugs, whatever it is, and you know what? And we really don't have to pay anything. I mean, you can come here but as in the big book says, the answer to all our problems. So imagine that. As like hitting the lottery. You come somewhere and they say, well, look, you could go to these big diet programs. You could spend thousands of dollars. And they say, look, maybe we can help you with the food. And probably we can. But can they brag that we can help you with all your problems? And the whole thing comes down to this. Usually it's compulsive thinking. Negative thinking is compulsion. Thinking negative about ourselves, about the world, about life. So it's compulsive thinking. So why not use that same energy to compulsively positively think? Think about that. You can use the same energy in a different direction. And we talked about something about transcending, not fighting, not being in a problem, but transcending above it. And the way to do that is through the steps, spirituality, spiritual awakening, and the way we're brought up in our society. For many of us, I know myself, I can speak for, things weren't solved by spirituality. There's no such thing as that. It was all about the age of reason. Science will fix it. And Dr. Silkwood said in the big book, he says, with all the doctors and scientists of the day, they couldn't figure out the answer to the alcohol addiction. And here we are almost 100 years later, and have they figured out the answer to alcohol addiction? Have they figured out the magic pill? The same with the diet. Have they figured out the magic pill or shot for that? They constantly think we may have the answer, but when it all comes down to it, it's a thinking problem. It says in the big book on the OA 12 and 12, on the 10th, let me read that a little bit. On page 10, it talks about, it says here, just a little bit, then horrified, this is the OA 12 and 12, what we are doing to ourselves with food, we became obsessed with diets. We spent lots of money on weight loss schemes. We bought all sorts of appetite suppressants. We joined diet clubs and fitness centers. We had ourselves hypnotized, analyzed. We had major surgery to our digestive systems. We had our ears stapled, our jaws wide shut. All of these we did willingly, hoping we could still eat all we wanted and be free of the compulsion. So if the compulsion is still there, the mind is an amazing, powerful thing. So if we don't change the thinking, then all is just lost, because nothing is going to be, you could be on a diet and maybe, they say 95% of diets fail, but maybe the 5% who are on it, well, you could say, well, they did achieve it, and it's been a few years now, but they're miserable. Every day. I was on a strict diet. It's called the gray sheet diet. I'd have to say every day I was miserable, and at the end of a year, it was perfect. I lost all the weight. I was at my goal weight. I was in perfect shape, but I didn't change my thinking problem. Matter of fact, my thinking was one of restricting, of trying to control it. Step one says we're powerless. So I didn't take the leap of faith that this program talks about. Have we had a spiritual awakening? So you could talk today about your spiritual awakening. You could relate it to any addiction or anything in life, in your relationships, in with people and work, whatever it is. In your depression, anxiety, have we gone through, passed through it, and gone to a different plane of thinking? The big book talks about it's the fourth dimension. The fourth dimension is being out of this three-dimensional box we're in. We're in like a prison of the mind, of the ego, and the self. And all spirituality and all religions, and people say, well, the 12-step program, they'll come to these meetings and say it's a cult. Well, if this is a cult, then all spirituality and religion is a cult, because it all is on the same basis. Not only spirituality and religions, but even philosophy. The ancient Greek philosophers, Stoics, or whatever it was, always thought about, it has to be something in the thinking. Be stoic, not to be involved with all of these, feelings and emotions and things that derive from the self. Step 3 says, become void of the self. Relieve me of bondage of self. The self, the ego, and this is where a belief in a higher consciousness, a higher power comes in. And you know what we were making a higher power? If you're here for food addiction, we're making food a higher power. It was the answer to our problem. It was a drug, alcohol. It was being better, power, money, success. The more we got, the more we wanted. On the other side, there's 10 times the pain. So if you're trying to derive your pleasure, and it's momentary pleasure, from food, as an example, it'll be drugs, alcohol, we'll talk about food, then on the other side there's a tremendous amount of pain, because the body becomes addicted physiologically and psychologically, and then when it's not there, if that's your main basis for life, then you get depressed and you need more and more of it. So there's something that's rewarding and is very fulfilling, and it's called spiritual bread. And the more you think about it, the more you go to that direction and work that spiritual muscle, the more happiness and pleasure you'll get out of what I like to call spiritual bread.